Well, the Switch 2 presentation came and went with a big surprise in there. The reveal that Kirby Air Ride was getting a sequel over 20 years later shocked everyone. The reveal of the game's director made some people nervous. Not for lack of trust, Sakurai's proven himself several times over, but if he's working on a Kirby game, that makes the immediate future of Smash Bros. Rather complicated. Ultimate's been nice and all, but it's fallen off over time since its DLC wrapped up, and some deep-seated problems have floated to the surface over time, especially competitively. With Sakurai off doing something else, are we stuck waiting even longer for the next game than we thought? Actually, by some twist of fate, another path has opened that wasn't there before. The presentation also showed off Switch 2 editions, upgrades of Switch 1 games that offer enhancements, and, sometimes, new content. With a handful of games getting this feature already, could Ultimate be next? It's a more complex question than it sounds, so let's take the plunge. Could it happen? How could it work? And what new content could, potentially, accompany it? Okay, first things first. How do we know we're actually onto something with this? Do we have any reason to think they could upgrade Smash Ultimate? Or that something is being worked on right now? Actually, yes. Well, maybe. Who here remembers Bandai Namco announcing a new two-part studio dedicated to collaborative projects with Nintendo? You know, Studio 2 and Studio S? You can imagine which half raised eyebrows. Well, with Sakurai making a statement that Bamco is behind Kirby Air Riders, the safe guess would be the new studio is behind it. Or half of the studio, because we've reason to think they're working on two projects. In late 2023, some obscure job listings went out for two vaguely described Bamco-developed games. One a 3D action game, one a 2D game, both under the mysterious new studio. The 3D project, in hindsight, was probably Air Riders, but the 2D game is still unaccounted for. 2D gameplay under Studio S, working with Nintendo, you can see why it has some folks thinking. But wait, could Smash still be in the cards if Sakurai's tied up making Air Riders? He said before that he has trouble imagining the series sailing on without him at the helm to guide it. But that's where a Switch 2 edition would come in. A smaller project that updates an already finished game with, potentially, new content in tow could be easier to oversee as a producer or supervisor while directing a different game. We've seen others do it before. Back in the mid-2010s, Tekken series head Katsuhiro Harada directed Tekken 7 and produced/supervised Pokken Tournament, two games that came out within half a year of each other and were developed mostly at the same time. Who's to say Sakurai, an infamous workaholic, might not be doing something similar? So this means Smash might be on the table after all. Maybe they're hard at work under a new director, with Sakurai ducking in from next door every now and then to make sure nothing's caught on fire. And if they'd rather Sakurai direct the actual Smash 6 personally, maybe that side team is working on a Switch 2 edition upgrade instead. Maybe this is even why Nintendo was fine with offering Sakurai a proposal for a Kirby Air Ride sequel way back in 2021, and why he was so enthusiastic about it. Admittedly, this part's about 40% insight and 60% speculation. I can read between the lines, but I'm not some kind of prophet. But hey, maybe my educated guesswork is onto something. Maybe. Possibly. Hopefully? Alright, if it is possible, then how do you just restart development on a game that hasn't been worked on in ages? Our best bet is looking at other games that have done it. Among fighting games particularly, it's pretty rare and usually involved a re-release, but it's not unheard of. Street Fighter is no stranger to updated versions of its games. Street Fighter 2 had multiple expansions, though this might not be the best comparison. They were all in development one after the other, unless you count that 2017 anniversary version. Street Fighter Alpha 3 got a few extra characters in later ports to the GBA and PSP, though that might not compare well either. The series had moved on to other games by the time those were made, and they weren't designed with the usual competitive metagame in mind. On the smaller end, we've seen a couple indie fighting games pull it off. Skullgirls restarted development once after changing hands, and Rivals of Aether added Steam Workshop compatibility out of nowhere, though that game was still doing maintenance updates, so it wasn't totally dead. maybe our examples from past fighting games aren't very clear-cut. So what about other Nintendo titles? Oh yeah, this exact thing happened with the Booster Course Pass. After Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was left untouched for years, suddenly it had 6 waves worth of DLC on the way. A lot of the tracks were carryovers from Mario Kart Tour, the mobile spin-off developed in the interim, but at least a handful weren't. Hell, if you squint a little, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe itself might be an example, despite being a port. It came out around 2 years after the original version's DLC wrapped up. And outside of Mario Kart, Nintendo Switch Sports finally added basketball a year and a half after its last major update and more than a year after its last cosmetics were added. The fact that Nintendo has sorta kinda done this before had people wondering for a while if they'd pull a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe again, releasing a port of Ultimate with some extra content and just having that be the Switch 2's Smash game. But with the Switch 2 being backward compatible and capable of giving Switch 1 games next-gen upgrades, the playing field has shifted somewhat. The question now is, considering the ways they've updated games before, would a potential Switch 2 edition of Ultimate be our Smash title for the new system's lifespan? Honestly, I'm not much a fan of the idea. Like I mentioned before, the game has some problems that a simple update wouldn't be able to address. Being stuck with those same issues glaring at us for an entire second console generation would be not ideal. Especially when so many Smash veterans have shown more blemishes over time, with outdated or poorly implemented movesets that just don't reflect who they've become by now. A Switch 2 edition of Ultimate would not be equipped to overhaul any veterans the way a true sequel would. Imagine Samus being stuck with her Other M design and outdated kit for another 7 years, or Sonic being stuck with the many problems he currently has. Good thing that might not be the only way to handle this. What if instead of taking after the base game of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, they did something in the style of the Booster Course Pass? What if they used a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate as a stopgap? Mario Kart World is set to launch about a year and a half after the BCP wrapped up. What if Ultimate gets another round of content to hold fans over, then Sakurai helms the actual Smash 6 once development on Air Riders wraps up? Sure, we'd still have to deal with Ultimate's bigger issues for a while, but it wouldn't be as long as going the entire console generation. This would also have a hidden upside. Several Nintendo characters lately have gotten big reworks or expansions of their abilities, some from recent Switch 1 games, some coming to the Switch 2. Doing a stopgap update now, with Smash 6 coming down the road, would let the latter incorporate all of these new changes. Seriously, imagine Samus with abilities from Metroid Dread and Prime 4, or Peach getting to use more stuff she picked up in Showtime, or DK being able to pull a chunk of rock out of the ground and throw it at people. The Smash community is still divided on what they want the series to do next, but if these developers pull it off right, we could get both. A last hurrah for Ultimate's monumental roster, and a new game that does its own thing, if the stars align. So, if this could work as a stopgap type update, what might a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate look like? To get a clearer idea, let's look closer at every first-party Switch 2 edition that we know of so far. Super Mario Party Jamboree is getting a bunch of new stuff via the add-on Jamboree TV. Entire new modes and side games designed around the system's mouse mode, camera, and microphone. All under the premise of Bowser hosting a game show, and not a single Bowser Revolution to be found. Oh, and party mode's also getting the camera and mic functionality, so you can see everyone's reactions when Chance Time makes you trade stars with the person in last. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are getting big graphics and performance updates. All those spots that made the Switch 1 struggle are looking smooth as silk now. They're also getting a companion phone app with a bunch of quality of life features and extra lore. Kirby and the Forgotten Land has a whole new set of stages on the way. A strange meteor shower, including what looks suspiciously like a Jamba heart, is crystallizing parts of the new world, and it's up to Kirby to discover what's going on and rescue any wayward aliens. And Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon Legends ZA will have Switch 2 enhancements, once they're actually out. Pay a little extra and play it on the new hardware for higher resolutions and frame rates. You'll have to take my word for it. I'm still stuck using underpowered tech for my videos until I'm in a better spot financially. In other words, there are multiple paths a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate could take. The simplest would be just buffing the graphics and calling it a day. This option doesn't feel very likely right now, in my opinion. Not only would that be so blasé that fewer people would pay for the upgrade, the only Switch 2 editions announced so far that only have enhanced visuals are the two whose base games aren't out yet. They're basically cross-gen titles in the form of a next-gen patch, which would not apply to a game like Ultimate that's been out for over 6 years. Well, what if they add a little more? Something smaller but meaningful, like what the Zelda duology are getting. Could they give Ultimate another round of spirits and spirit battles? More alternate costumes, whether for the Miis or more substantial alts for other fighters? More ways to share clips and custom stages, like a dedicated app. Something to sweeten the deal of dropping $10 on an upgrade. Sure, that might get some people to bite, but that doesn't explain everything we've heard. If the new Bamco studio has been working on 2 projects at once for over a year, what are the odds of the second just being minor additions to an already existing game? Wouldn't you figure it'd be something more substantial if they were going out of their way to hire new staff? Which brings us to the path I think is more plausible. A bigger upgrade akin to Kirby and Mario Party that brings DLC level content with it, which could take a lot of forms. One of Ultimate's weak spots is how shallow its single player content is, so adding new solo modes could really appeal to people. Smash Run can make a return, or a full set of event matches, or maybe they could finally expand the stage builder to let players make their own target tests. No, I will not shut up about that idea because it's too perfect. Maybe they could create a whole new campaign, some kind of companion to World of Light with different mechanics, maybe an epilogue of some kind, and, hopefully, a new batch of balance patches this game has sorely needed. A lot of really problematic stuff wasn't discovered until after patches dropped at the end of 2021. Using the opportunity to cleanse the most toxic parts of the metagame could rekindle a lot of interest, and a shakeup that also buffs several weaker characters more meaningfully than most previous patches did would bring back even more fans. Oh, I know what you're thinking. All this talk about better graphics, extra costumes, new modes, they're just window dressing for Smash's main event. So let's stop beating around the bush. Could a Switch 2 version of Ultimate include new characters? Well, let's take another look at the 2 major upgrades we know of so far. What's Mario Party getting? A bunch of crazy new modes for a game already known for its side events, and extra communication features to make standard board games even more interactive and friendship-destroying. What's Kirby getting? A new set of levels to platform through that follow different paths than the originals, with a new otherworldly threat for the puffball to face, and undoubtedly more lore that goes way harder than it has any right to. In other words, both content packs are playing to the strengths of their respective games. It's a small sample size, but other major upgrades might very well do the same. I mean, Sakurai even said once that the biggest draw of Smash Bros. Is the characters. I legitimately think a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate could bring at least a few more newcomers with it. Let's go a step further. If it is possible, who could these new characters be? I think we might be able to narrow it down. Kind of. First, we're probably looking at first-party characters to accompany the upgrade. Nintendo's own stable would be much easier to work with given the circumstances compared to guest fighters, and wouldn't require hashing out royalties for an upgrade patch. Next, they might want to focus on characters who've done stuff recently. Focusing on the ones who missed the boat for Ultimate and or its DLC, who weren't active at the time, or who didn't even exist yet, would help the roster feel less dated and appeal to people who've played those games recently. Third, we're probably best off assuming anyone who's currently an assist trophy, boss, or major stage element is out of the running. The Fighter's Passes never touched any of those originally, so it seems to be a hard rule that we're best off expecting to stay true for now. Plus, simply turning off the assist version of the character when the playable version is being used wouldn't work so well for spirit battles where that assist is scripted to show up. I realize that would screw over multiple popular requests right now, including at least one of my own, but we're best off working within these limits until we see proof of them changing. Related to that is one more piece to this puzzle. Remember those surprise spirit events that dropped out of nowhere for Ultimate's 5-year anniversary? If a Switch 2 edition is happening, I bet those spirit events were handled by the same team, and might very well have been created with any potential Switch 2 edition newcomers in mind. In other words, I wager that anyone appearing in these is not going to become playable in the update itself. Anyone who got a spirit before that is probably still fair game. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this group of 4 were runner-ups who they passed up on for one reason or another, like not wanting to do anything as complex yet as a multiple characters in one concept. Which wouldn't be any solace to their fans. Noah and Mio are high up on my list too, guys, but they might still have a shot a little later. With all of that in mind, here's a potential batch of 6 characters I could see accompanying a Switch 2 edition upgrade. Drum roll, please. Bandana D, Octoling with a Splatoon 3 inspired moveset, Ravenbeak, Meowscarada, its Prevo got an anniversary spirit, but a few playable mons had other members of their lines do that in the base game, Ring Fit Trainee, repping a new series, and, oh boy, Aleer, who was suspiciously absent from the anniversary events. These 6 cover a wide range of designs, art styles, fighting styles, and represented genres. At least 1 or 2 would appeal to almost everyone and persuade them into getting the upgrade. But would that really be it? What if they still weren't done? What if they did want to hold off on starting Smash 6 until Sakurai was done with Air Riders, and wanted something more to hold fans over that was still something a new secondary team could handle? What if they did a 3rd round of DLC? If that happened, all bets would be off, since the newcomers for that wouldn't be finalized until long after the first batch and anniversary events were finalized. Everyone in those events would be fair game again. Hint hint, there's how Noah and or Mio could still make it. It also reopened the door for third-party newcomers, though maybe more restrained than the sky-high expectations some fans have set. This would likely be on a tighter budget. If you squint a little, you just might see how the timing and character count could work out. 89 playable characters right now. A Switch 2 edition drops around the end of this year that adds 6 more for 95 total. Then, Fighters Pass Volume 3 runs through 2026 and adds 5 more for a final total of 100 playable characters. A huge milestone that attracts a lot of attention, and then Smash 6 can be ready at the end of 2028 as a soft reboot that does something new and big like Mario Kart is doing, giving fans a reason to play that despite a much smaller roster. Is this a reach? Probably, but you could kinda see it, right? That's the if, how, what, and why of a potential Switch 2 edition of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The makeup of Studio 2/S and a yet unaccounted for project they were hiring for means something Smash related might well be in the works over there, with Sakurai supervising or passing the torch to someone else. Nintendo's updated a couple other games recently that were thought dead, and fighting games as a whole are no stranger to content expansions. A big update to Ultimate to hold fans over until the actual Smash 6 wouldn't be that unusual. And while it could just be a minor update or a new mode or two, the biggest Switch 2 edition upgrades we've seen so far play to the strengths of their games. And for Smash, that would probably mean more new characters. Overall, I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, it'd mean more Smash to play and more to talk about, which is kind of the lifeblood of my channel, even if I delve into other topics. On the other, it'd mean kicking the reboot can a few steps further down the road. Like I said a while back, I think Smash will have to start fresh at some point, because you can't keep building atop the same game forever without it getting both stale and impossible to structurally maintain. They'll need to scale things down and go in a different direction eventually, and the longer they wait, the more painful ripping off that bandage will be. How do you feel about this, though? Do you believe a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate is in the cards? Or do you think the actual Smash 6 is closer, or further away, than it seems? Would a big update to Ultimate be your first choice for Smash's next path? What would you do if it was your call? Just keep it civil in the comments, alright? Special thanks to the following for helping make this video happen. Thanks to my patrons as well for the continued support as we wait even longer for more Smash news. But if you're new here and looking for more like this, I've done multiple videos lately about what the next new Smash game could bring, even if we might take a detour first. So, until next time, I don't know, play around a classic mode with your main for old time's sake?